even in a post-Putin world, Russia is going to be an unstable force on Europe's eastern frontier. Europe will have to be endlessly protecting itself at a time when America will want to switch its attention back to China. So that is going to be a big cost for Europe going forward.
Welcome back to BVTV, brought to you by Reuters Breaking Views. I'm Peter Thal Larsen, the global editor of Breaking Views. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Hugo Dixon, coming to us from West London. Hugo, good to see you again.
Lovely to be with you, Peter.
So Hugo, on Friday, it will be a year since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Safe to say that Vladimir Putin is definitely not winning that war. But it's also quite hard to think about how there might be a peace. And you've been trying to sort of look forward to what might happen next. Now, given the difficulty of making any kind of predictions about this conflict, what do you think are some of the possibilities of what could happen?
Well, I mean, I've focused more on what it means sort of medium term for Europe. Rather than, but of course, then to get to what it means for Europe, you have to sort of think what's likely to happen on the battlefield, and then what's likely to happen back in Moscow. And I mean, I think in terms of the scenarios on the battlefield, I mean, my general view is that the most likely scenario is that we get neither side winning and no peace deal, because it would be impossible, at least for the time being, impossible for the Ukrainians to agree to a peace deal that gives away some of their territory, and impossible for Vladimir Putin to agree to a peace deal which means giving up all of the territory that he's got in Ukraine, including Crimea. So what you're left with is either a continuing hot war or some sort of frozen conflict, a bit like what we've had in Korea for 70 years, almost. So that's, I mean, not saying that it has to go on for 70 years, but that's the sort of the most likely sort of, it seems to me, the most likely sort of scenario, so long as Putin is in the Kremlin. Now, at some point he will go. I mean, he will not live forever. So, you know, certainly in 20 years, I would say that will break, and it might break beforehand, either because he's pushed out or kicked out or dies earlier. So then you have to look at what are the sort of post-Putin scenarios, and even in the post-Putin scenarios, I mean, my general view is that Europe is going to have a problem on its hands on its eastern frontier, and this is going to be a problem that's going to take its toll economically, really, in three ways. One is that we're in an arms race, and this is going to go on for quite some time. We're building up. We're still in the early stages, as far as Europe's concerned, of rebuilding its armaments industries. The second thing is there's going to be a very big bill for rebuilding Ukraine. And the third thing is that there's not going to be any serious economic re-engagement with Russia. That's more of a lost opportunity, because, I mean, there are more sanctions to come. I mean, the European Union has been considering more sanctions just today, and there will be more pressure for disinvestment from civil society on Western companies inside Russia. So there will be some disengagement, further disengagement, but in a sense, we've already had a lot of that disengagement. So it's more of a sort of lost opportunity, but it's not going to be a big opportunity, because if you think that Russia is in a big war economy situation and is going to be for some time to come, it's not going to be an interesting place for foreigners to do business.
Yeah. So if we think about the costs, I mean, obviously the big costs have been borne by Ukraine and by the Ukrainian people in terms of deaths and destruction and so forth. But if we think about the cost for Europe, then you talked about the arms race. So everybody's going to have to sort of invest more in defense. And it sounds like you're saying they're going to have to keep doing that. And also, we're still living with much more expensive energy than before this invasion.
Yeah, gas. I mean, obviously, we're way down from the peak of last summer, but it's still, if you look at sort of the forward price for this winter of gas, it's 4 times higher than it was 2 years ago. And then
Mm.
2 years ago, in the last year before the war, there was a run up in the price, and so we're not very far from where we were a year ago. But so that's a cost that Europe is facing in terms of competitiveness, in terms of household bills, and of course in terms of the fiscal deficit, insofar as governments are continuing to subsidize, and they are continuing to subsidize both consumers and business customers. So that's one part of the cost that is certainly there.
But so Hugo, what about this arms race that's happening? I mean, there's a lot of announcement. Just had the Munich Security Conference. Everybody's talking about building up armies and so forth. That's also presumably going to be an expense.
That's a huge expense, and obviously we've seen, both Germany immediately after the invasion, but now the new defense minister has been saying that it will need to go beyond NATO's standard 2% of GDP. Germany was nowhere near 2% of GDP. If you look at what the sort of Poland is putting in, the sort of arms that it wants to acquire, I mean, they're sort of mind-boggling. But the point I wanted to make is that this is not just for now. This is actually a multi-year phenomenon. And it's a multi-year phenomenon because even in a post-Putin world, Russia is going to be, except in the one benign scenario of a stable democracy, which doesn't seem to be the most likely scenario, Russia is going to be an unstable
Mm.
force on Europe's eastern frontier. It will be weaker than it was. Some of its army will have been destroyed, it's already been destroyed, but it will be rebuilding that army and it will be learning lessons. And so Europe will have to be endlessly protecting itself at a time when America will want to switch its attention back to China and has been saying for years that Europe needs to take a bigger share.
Yeah.
And now actually it will have to take a bigger share in its own defense. So that is going to be a big cost for Europe going forward.
So it is a big cost, but it is still a much lower cost, I think, all things considered, than the one scenario we haven't discussed here, which is where Russia were to win.
Well, indeed, because if Russia were to win, whatever that meant, but say take a big chunk of Ukraine, even Kiev, or certainly what people were expecting only a year ago, is that it would be pretty much a walkover for Putin.
Yeah.
Then the rearmaments would be going through the roof. Europe would be concerned about not only what happens to Moldova, but what happens to Poland, what happens to the Baltic republics, and we would be in a real full war economy situation, rather than what we've got at the moment is that Russia and Ukraine are in full war economy and Europe is getting into sort of heavy rearmament phase.
Okay, Hugo, fascinating as always. Thank you for your time and talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Peter.